It's a very diverse group of people. I mean, we tend to label them as immigration from Central America. You can probably have, three subcategories. There's the category that is being taught abundantly, and we can touch upon about this, which are unaccompanied minors, so small kids that are arriving by themselves. But they don't represent a large share of the migrants, obviously. There's then two different types of migrants. There's individuals that are in search for job in the US, and there's a lot of Mexicans actually going that road. There's a lot also of immigration from Cuba, from Haiti, that actually go through the Central American routes, less dangerous on some aspects, or they're being sold by a traffic organization, the ticket, and then they have to handle it themselves through there. And then there are the families, and a lot of families are actually arriving for political concerns, and very truly so. When you look at the situation of some of those countries, they're very diverse also, and we should not put El Salvador together with Nicaragua or Guatemala. I'm happy to engage into an individual conversation on each one of those countries, but there are different desires for migrating. It's a very long journey. It's a complex one, so no one leaves this country just out of his goodwill and go through that journey. We have to mention this, but the numbers have skyrocketed over the last few weeks and months. It's the case every single year at that period because of the fact that it's not too hot to go through the desert, but the level of surge is higher than anticipated, and that might be also linked to obviously the change in administration in the US. Happy to go deeper on one of those issues. Just let me know which one.
So let's break some of that down. Obviously, this is happening during a COVID pandemic. How is that affecting the migration patterns from certain countries within Central America?
So I was mentioning that surge in numbers, and it's obvious that part of that surge are people trying to arrive to the US to be able to have a vaccine faster. There's been a series of scandals all across Latin America, vacuna gates in Peru or other scandals in Argentina, and then questions of how that's been handled by a large majority of countries across the region. And as a result, obviously the health component, public health component, and pandemic components has an impact on the numbers of migrants. It's also interesting to see that it's also part of the answers in the US, meaning that there are, on some, probably most, crossing points now, a population is being stopped because they can't cross the border because of COVID. Those, camps, they're high, better camps that we can have in the Middle East and other regions, obviously, but are, being completely filled. So obviously we continue having, newcomers, but it also is an argument, that's what I'm trying to say, into the answer from the United States on trying to find the right way to, process. You mentioned Kamala Harris. She's on top line of this answer. The problem here, from Washington perspective, if you're being critical of the new administration, is that there is a long-term plan, but what's the short-term plan? In a sense that it's going to be an issue that is going to be talked upon on the agenda for a very long time. There's clear interest also from the Republican Party to have immigration on top of the agenda because that actually fires up the basis. It's going to put, embarrassment on how to handle from the Democratic perspective because there's so many different views on how to handle this. And so the Republican Party wants to keep it on top of the agenda.
As you look at what's happening with the Biden administration, they've said, at least for now, that people from Central America should not try and enter the US. What does await people right now who are trying to make their way into the US?
So obviously, if you decide to go on this journey, it's whatever is the position from the US, you're going to try to cross the frontier one way or another. And so that doesn't really dissuade anyone taking that decision. It's a hard decision to do it. Even when we were mentioning, during past interviews, the question of the wall at the border, that wouldn't have solved the issue of immigration. That probably would have increased the number of dead people trying to pass, maybe. But so here the idea is really to try to see it and work on the root causes of each country. You have in those countries, when you look at it, you have obviously, I'm obviously not going to be talking too much about Panama or Costa Rica, which are further along in Central America, more Caribbean. But when you look at Nicaragua, who's going to go through a potential transfer of power from the old regime of Ortega, and in the last elections were filled with the bloodshed in different cities. So obviously here you're talking about a conflict, potentially very highly conflictive region, and you understand that people want to migrate for political reasons or for their own security. When you actually go through the list of countries, then you have Honduras. And Honduras is a country where the current president quite close to the former administration in the US, or at least supported, as is now being we're going to be convicted of basically embezzlement and trafficking and drug trafficking in his own country. And so there's obviously a very unstable situation in Honduras coming through. And then El Salvador is a small, very interesting country in the sense that you have a young president, more from the left wing, who has been his Congress has given him a large majority in parliament. But obviously the traditional take of a regime which is more on the left wing is probably not to work first with the United States. So that can't be really a pilot of why you could actually, it would be complex. It would be interesting to do so, but it's a very tiny country. And then you have Guatemala. And Guatemala is the big one here. The problem here is questions of governance. The Trump administration wanted to have basically the camps at the frontier at the US basically sent back at the frontier of Guatemala so that you don't have to deal with this. We'll deal with Mexico and then we stop them there. But there's no real strong institutional capacity in a country where it's been, you look at past elections, a series of potentially progressive candidates, or at least they had a stature at the United Nations, or in different centers that were have no past scandals were barred from running. So you had only a very limited amount of candidates, and the Jimmy Morales administration was obviously not successful. Now the new administration right now lacks the capacity also to implement those policies and strategies at this level.